So my name is Arjanelle, and I'm on the customer success team here at Global Software. So your presenter today is going to be my colleague, Matt Cook, who is a senior implementation and educational professional. And Matt has actually been with Global for 12 years, helping train and consult for our customers as well. And then, so as many of you are aware, we've started offering continued education webinars for our Spreadsheet Server customers. This is designed to make sure you're getting the most use out of your tool. And if you would like to review any of these previous webinars, they can be found on our customer portal. And if you do not have access or know your password, please contact your customer success executive, and they will provide you the instructions for access. So with that said, I'm going to turn it over to Matt for the demonstration.
Okay, well, good morning. As Arjun said, my name is Matt Cook, and we are going to talk about a variety of advantages to using one of the functions that you end up getting when you purchase Spreadsheet Server. There's a piece called or Profile Scheduler, and within the Profile Scheduler, and in general, Profile Scheduler allows you to schedule several different types of things. One of those is the things you can schedule is what we're going to cover in today's session, and it's to schedule what are called custom table loads. And what you can do with this is you can use this to pull data out of your SAP system and put it into a separate SQL Server database. So we'll start with kind of the background on this. So as you know, SAP's got a lot of tables, over 80,000 tables. I know that the system I'm connecting to has 123,000 tables. And each of these tables has a lot of fields, hundreds many times, and the vast majority of them aren't even populated with any data because SAP is built to deal with lots of different types of businesses and different types of situations. The tables aren't particularly indexed for reporting requirements. They're indexed for SAP's screens. There's millions and millions of records in many of the tables that do have data. And if you're using a tool to read the data out of those SAP tables, there's an ABAP layer you have to go through, which really limits, almost completely prevents any sort of normal SQL functions, the normal kind of calculations that you would do. There are some tables that are called cluster tables that are kind of a mysterious, to me anyway, on the back end how that whole thing works. But what the cluster tables oftentimes have a lot of very useful information in them. But the thing specifically that's limited about cluster tables when you're using them out of SAP is you can't join other tables to cluster tables. And then the vast majority of the fields, the numeric fields, are stored as positive. So when you're trying to do debits and credits, all the data is positive. And since you can't do calculations, they have to be dealt with as positive fields. So these are some of the challenges that happen when you're writing queries and pulling data out of just a native SAP system. So, and then to handle this, SAP has a business warehouse, but it's not a simple or inexpensive way to go. So the information I have says that the initial license fee is close to $50,000. There's a minimum couple of $1,000 per user license. It's a while to set up. Could be a couple of months, and you've got to have SAP experts involved and so forth. So it's a complicated and potentially fairly expensive process to set up the business warehouse. Here's sort of a diagram of what we would do as an alternative to that, where you have your native SAP database, and what we can do with Profile Scheduler Custom Table Load is we can pull data out of that and put this into a SQL Server database. And you can organize your data, extract it, only the data you want. So it doesn't have to be the entire table. It can be just a subset of the data, where it's certain years of information or months of information or types of, different organizations that isn't the entire table. You can create your own indexes so that when you're writing queries against this subset of the data in your local Spreadsheet Server, SQL Server database, you can make those queries run much more quickly. You can do incremental updates, meaning you don't have to each time pull the entire table or rebuild the table each time. You can just update it with the changed or added records, and I'll show you how that happens. And you can schedule this to run. This is all housed underneath what we would call our profile scheduler function. So you can set it up to run on a daily basis, an hourly basis, a monthly basis. You have a lot of options on how that might happen. Or you can set it up to run on demand. All right. So we've kind of highlighted the challenges with dealing with or pulling queries from a native SAP system, and then so how we would approach that. Again, there's 80 to 130,000 tables. We're going to only upload the required tables, and again, that's going to be probably a very small subset of that. Just oftentimes no more than 10 or 20 tables. We can only pull, or we can set it up to pull just the fields you're interested in. Again, you can create your indexes as you pull those in that address the specific reports you're building. Because we can pull smaller sets of records and fields, your reports are much quicker. You now have, and this is a big one in my mind, the limited functionality due to restraints of the ABAP layer are gone. So all the functionality you need doing in regular SQL queries, all your calculated fields, all your changing, the sign-on fields and so forth become available. Cluster tables are no longer have that limitation of no joins to them, and let's see, majority values. And this is, I've already talked about this. The ability to take your debits, credits, for example, and assign the correct sign to the field, so that your reporting is much easier as well. So to set up this whole process, and I will go through at a high level. I'll show you all the screens involved and so forth. But you need to. All you need to do is set up an empty SQL Server database, and then there are a set of connections you need to create. Two in particular. There's a connection that would be necessary to read your data out of your SAP system, and that's almost certainly already in place, because if you're a Spreadsheet Server user, there's a connection there that's allowing Spreadsheet Server to read data from your native SAP system. Then a second connection needs to be built that allows you to write data into the target database, and there's a switch I'll show you where you add that in when you set up that connection. And then you just select what you want to transfer. It could be tables, and again, be just a handful of tables, generally speaking, and you can choose to pull in all the fields from the table or just those fields that you're interested in. Again, keeping it as small and as useful as you need. You have ability to build SQL views, and these would be done using a query. I'll show you kind of the steps involved. But you can, when you build a view, if you're not familiar with a view, what that means is a already pre-combined set of tables, which then becomes what looks like a single table when you go to use this view. So you can preset a lot of things, not only the tables that are involved and how they're connected, but you can preset or reset the column headings to be more useful. You can pre-calculate a variety of calculations. So again, the debit credits, you can set them with the actual sign they should have rather than leaving with the H and the S indicator. You can do a lot of the math ahead of time. You can you can translate your date fields to look like regular dates and so forth. So you can massage the data when you build this view to make it a very much easier and straightforward process to pull the data out into reports. You can set up indexes. Again, just makes the reports run that much more quickly. The full and incremental updates are available, and then you can schedule the whole thing to run on a regular basis, and we will show that. All right. So I'll start by just kind of going over a high-level case study. This wasn't one that I dealt with specifically, but one of our other consultants helped a manufacturing company that was had to build reports with several areas of SAP product plans, and the reports, when they were built against the native SAP data, were taking an enormous amount of time, between 1 and 4 hours to run, and oftentimes they would just hang if there was really a long report. The volume of data in the tables was very large. You can see here it mentions over 1 million records per year, and there's 15 years of data. Indexing did not address any of the report needs. They're built for the internal SAP system needs, and so that without indexes, that just really hampers our ability to run reports in a timely manner. And so what we implemented was to use the profile scheduler to pull the data for the reports that they needed into a SQL Server database, just the tables necessary, just for the years that were necessary. So we didn't have 15 million records in tables and so forth. There was quite a bit fewer. And we could then also create the indexes so that to improve the report performance. And the resulting reports, where it had been several hours per plant to report, now is reduced to just about 3 minutes per plant, and they could run all the reports in really less than a half an hour, where it was many hours with lots of opportunities to just hang and not even finish before. So, it was a huge win on a performance perspective. All right. So, where that takes us next is, skipped a slide, sorry, is to the demonstration. So this is where I'm going to show you what the screens look like when you go through this process. So I'm going to switch over to my computer here. All right, so the startup, the setup. So initially, you need to create a database. And that's done by coming into SQL Server Management Studio and just right-click, create a brand new database, take the defaults. That's all I've ever needed to do. Then after you've created this database, next thing to look at are connections. And so the connections are handled in part of Spreadsheet Server called the Application Configurator. It's a management component, and one of the things that it manages are connections to the various databases. So there's to create your custom database, there are two connections necessary. One of them is already in place if you're using Spreadsheet Server, and there's under the application settings there's a connection to read data from SAP. So that's one that we'll use. And then the other connection is a connection that you will build to this brand new database that you just created. And here's an example of the one I'm using today. It's a SQL Server connection because, again, so we have a source database, which is SAP, and a target database, which is the one we're filling up with SAP data. And so that's a SQL Server database. You can give it a name, give it connection information, which database on it's going to be using, and the key extra little option you have to select is this load local connection. That's what allows it to write information into our target database. So we've started for the setup. We've created the table. We've got the connections. Next, then, is going to be creating a normal table upload. So here in Profile Scheduler, I've got an example of one here. And I've got a job here that's going to pull data out of BSEG, EKKO, and EKPO and put those into identically. It'll create a table. It'll create a new table called the same names: BSEG, EKKO, and EKPO. And to create a job, I'll show you the initial step, but then I'll pull up the existing ones I've built. So you just start with new. So you're going to schedule some type of event. That's what this whole profile scheduler is about. The variety of things you can schedule are like distribution manager and custom table loads, some other types of options for specific different cases. But we're focusing right now on the custom table loads job. So, okay, I'm going to set up that, choose OK. And you get a screen that allows you to name it and sort of create it. So you give it a name and you put in some comments about what it's doing. Source database is going to be that SAP one for your production database, and then the target database is the pointer to go off to the SQL Server database you've created. And so what you're seeing listed here are only those that have that load local connection option checked. So there's quite a bit fewer listed. And this is the one that I'm going to be using. Okay, so I'm not going to actually set up this one here. I've already got one here, and I'll show you this one. So here's an example of one that's just pulling data for these three tables, and it's putting it in. We'll be putting it into your the SQL Server database. So here's that SAP one and load local.
Hey, Matt.
The next tab, yes.
We had one of the questions, and it may pertain to one of the slides or one of the steps you showed before. You were speaking about the cluster tables. And it says, how does this help with that? Can you speak a little bit more about that? Okay, well,
well-timed question. So a cluster table, BSEG is an example of a cluster table that in a number of different cases I've wanted to be able to pull data out of BSEG, and we can, if the data is just in SAP, we can pull data out of BSEG and put it into a report. But if I want to build a query that pulls data out of BSEG and some other tables as well, which is kind of how I'm going to show this, a cluster table can't be linked to any other tables. Once you pull a cluster, the information from a cluster table out of SAP and put it into a SQL Server table, then all your restrictions are gone. You can do all the different types of things that you normally would be able to do with a SQL Server database. You can join it to other tables. You can do calculations and so forth. So in this example here, I'm pulling data from, in this case, just three tables. I can set what I want to use for the primary key. I haven't done any indexes here, but it's just a matter of clicking in this box, and then I could create indexes on as many different fields as I find necessary for the types of reports that I'd be building. And I can, in the criteria box, this is where it gets especially valuable. And for BSEG, which is an enormous table, I can decide, well, I don't want to pull the entire table over. I'm going to just pull for document numbers between these values or dates. Usually it'd probably be dates that you would use to delimit which records you want. So I'm just pulling a piece of that out, and so in my target database, I'm going to have 3 tables, and BSEG is going to be some of the data out of the BSEG. And you certainly can pull the entire thing if you want. It's just going to take a while, but once it's in SQL Server, then you have it with all of the functionality. So I've set up my job. I've assigned which tables I'm going to pull, and then you'd set up the schedule. And I'll come back to schedule in a little while, but here's where you would just assign the schedule. So once you've done that, then I can either click on it and run it, or I can well, I've already run it, so I can schedule it to run. I've already run this one, so let me just kind of show you quickly what this looked like. Let's see here. I want to go to close this query. So once I've written all that data in to my database, here's an example of building a query using those 3 tables. So normally BSEG does not allow for any links to other tables, but because this is coming from my SQL Server version of the database, this is now a regular table, and I can join other tables to it. I can pull out, whichever the fields I want, which you could have done as well. But this is a much faster query now, and I have, all the restrictions have been eliminated about joining tables to BSEG or any other cluster tables. Okay, so that's doing just a regular old normal table upload. Another option in here that really gives you some nice advantages is if you can create custom views. And so what I mean by this, let me see, I'm going to close this query. And I'm going to do, I have a query here that pulls data from a couple of tables. So these are just going against your native SAP system. And in this case, it's just 2 tables. But what I'm going to do is I can take this query and use this to create a view. If you're not familiar with a view is a pre-combined set of tables like this. And the result of this is just a single table. So I've got this query that's pulling out some information. Again, it can be lots of the columns, can be all the columns. In this case, it's a subset of the columns. And then I can schedule this to run. And here I've got an example of this. Now, when I schedule this to run, let me open this one up. Instead of transferring tables, I'm going to transfer a custom view, is what it's called here. So what I'm going to be scheduling to run is that query I just showed you, which is a combination of BSIC and BSID. And when I run this, it's going to create a single resulting table, or what looks like a single resulting table. So I've already run this one. And if I close this query, and I've got another query that goes and gets the resulting information from the custom table that got created. So here, this table is the result of that query that used to be 2 tables. And again, that instead of 2 tables, it could be 12 tables or something like that. And so as a report developer, development reports against here is easier. And where this is a particular advantage is if you want to make report building possible or make it easier for people who maybe aren't as familiar with your SAP system, but you want to pre-build a set of tables together into a single table that deals with purchasing or with accounts payable or with inventory or sales. You can create a query that combines several tables together, does some translations, some calculations, and so forth, massages the data down, and creates a single sales transaction view or inventory view or AR view, that sort of thing. And then for the regular report builder, I would come in and just pull these pre-combined sets of data, and I don't need to know how to join those 12 tables together and how to translate that data and how to interpret that data. It can all be sort of digested for me and put out in a nice, easy-to-use form, which makes, again, kind of allows your end user or your super user, maybe you might call them, the ability to build reports without having that intimate SAP knowledge. So your IT system or your basis team or whatever, whoever's doing this could sort of pre-build the complicated stuff and let your end users build their reports without having to use as much IT resources as you might otherwise need. Okay, now we talked about also in the process of building these tables, I mentioned that you don't have to do full drops and dropping of the table and rebuilding them, and how you would accomplish that. So this is what we referred to as an incremental load. When I go to transfer data, the normal situation here is when you pick your connections, it tells you just to replace the data. So that's how when the default that would come up with the replace data option is checked. If I uncheck this, when the job goes to run, so I come over here to the tables to run, what's going to happen is as the records are loaded from EKKO, it's going to use whatever primary key you've designed or set up to look to see, is this record already in my system? If it's already there and it is the values, one or more of the values has changed, then it will update that record. If it's already there and none of the data has changed, then it will just not add that record. And if that record is not already there based on the primary key, then it adds it. So it's going to add new data. It's going to modify existing data where there's been changes, and it's going to ignore any records otherwise. So this would be what we call an incremental load. So that can speed things along quite nicely as well. All right, so show you a couple of examples of reports here, kind of a before and after type of a thing. So I have a report that I wrote a while back. This is before we had the profile scheduler option, or the custom table load option, and it's an aging report. And the way that I needed to get the steps I needed to go through to get this done was I had a query that pulls a lot of the information all the way, let's see, columns A through L here. So this data was pulled, and it's pulled just straight from SAP. And because I can't do any calculations in this data in order to create my aging buckets and translate my data and stuff, what I had to do is I had to pull it all in Excel and then do all my translations and calculations in Excel. And so I had additional formulas when this data is dumped into Excel. The way that the query designer will do it is it'll allow you to add other calculations to the final report. And so I have month or date translations. I have some date arithmetic that decides how many days past due it is, and then a bunch of if statements that go through and set up the various aging category buckets. So we pull a lot of data, and then we do all sorts of calculations and manipulations in Excel. And then what I needed to do to get the report done is I set it up through this whole process, and then over here I have a macro that fills this AP data tab, creates all these extra calculations, and then I have a macro built into this as well that takes all this information and turns it into a report. So let me show you how that runs here. You can kind of see it happen as it goes. I'm just going to change the date so it does a little something different. And I'd hit run. So it's currently filling the AP data tab, and all those Excel calculations are going. And then in a second here, you'll see it rebuild the pivot table. And so we had to go through all that in order to get just a simple AP aging report. It's doable, but it takes a while to set up, a lot of trial and error, a lot of stuff in Excel and so forth. And you got to be, pretty comfortable with macros. So that's how things happened in the past. With the custom table load option, though, we could take all this information and put it into and pull it out of SAP and put it into a SQL Server database. And when you do that, what that option looks like when you go to build the report is something like this, where it's the same report, but the steps to build it are dramatically easier. Here, I just have a single query that builds all this information. There's no Excel, all the different ifs and translations and so forth. We're not getting all the record by record information. The query that builds this is doing all that work. So let me show you what that query looks like now. Let's see if I can come over here. And so for that second version of that AP aging report, this is the query here. It's got a couple of tables, pulling out some fields. But the things that you can do here that make it so much easier to write this report is you can, in this case, I've got a case statements that assign the appropriate bucket to well, my phone kind of took off there. So I've got a case statement here that looks at the report date and assigns, does this record belong in the 0 to 30, 31 to 60, 61 to 90 type bucket, and it does the debit credit translation, does all that math in the query, and then I've got different versions of this, so I just copied the query down and set up the different buckets. And when I go to run the report, just set the date. That single query runs. There you go. It's all done. These are all the result of one query doing all the work. Instead of a query putting out to a tab with a lot of Excel manipulation and then a giant macro to turn it into a pivot table. Much, much simpler, much easier to maintain, much easier to modify if necessary. So, in summary, kind of just reviewing some of the things we've highlighted here, the advantages that the custom table load option and profile scheduler give you. There's some serious performance advantages that can be had where you can pull off just a small number of tables. You can pull off a subset of the records in the table. So instead of being 15 or 20 million records in the table, it might be just a few 100,000 records or so. You can make your reports run far more quickly by setting your indexes to match how you're trying to pull your data out. So you've got a smaller database with better indexes. That's going to be a big part of making this much easier to build and to run and much faster. Your whole report building process, the queries that they're using to build this now have all the regular SQL functionality, all the calculations that are possible, the data translations that are possible, and so forth. So you open up a very large set of options to really make your reports easier to build. And you can create custom views that, so you can simplify the data to work with by having these pre-joined sets of tables with maybe several of the calculations that are necessary on them already pre-done, and much better table or column names and so forth. So you can make the downstream report building process so much easier for the end report writers. So lots of advantages to this. I guess at this point I am open to questions. Get back over to the screen here.
If any of you have any questions, please just submit them to the Q&A box to the top right side, and we'll give you a few moments. Matt, we haven't had any other questions pop in, but we can wait just a few moments in case someone has any last-minute questions. Yes, I see we have one question, but they were just asking, is there a way you can kind of run back through combining the tables into one? If not, this will be recorded and sent out as well, but if not, if you have time to do that right quick, we can do that.
Sure. So the way I'm interpreting that question, and hopefully I've got this right, I think I know what they're asking about. So I have a query that might have any number of tables. In this case, it's very small. It's only got 2 tables, but same thing applies for any number of tables, where I assign how this whole thing gets put together, and then I pick out the various fields that I want to be available for the different reports that might come off of this. And again, you can pull all the fields if you want. And in the process here, I then schedule this to run. And let's see if I cancel out of this one. In this one, I would schedule that since the data, or as I'm pulling that data off or out of SAP, I'm using an EDQ file, which is a Query Designer query. I would find that under here, and so when I come in here, I would pick a new query, and this is the one that I just showed you. But you pick whichever query you have that's already assigned how the data is combined, and this process, when it runs, creates a single table, and that single table, I've called it BSIC BSID. And so then when I'm going to use, so this is loaded via the profile scheduler into a single table, and then when I go to use the results of that, here would be that single table that got created by that EDQ file. So you start with a query that defines all the different tables and how they're combined. You run it through Profile Scheduler and load that into your SQL Server database. When it loads into the SQL Server database, it combines all that into a single data object. It's not really right to call this a table. It looks like a table at this point, but it's really a combination of several tables. I hope that helps clarify.
Yes.
Give them a minute here to. Oh. Do we have any other questions? This was scheduled for an hour, so I do have plenty of time to deal with anything else that people might want to bring up.
We'll give them a moment.
Mhm.
Okay. Okay, well, thank you so much, Matt, for taking the time to walk us through Profile Scheduler. We thank you guys for taking the time to attend. On this slide here, you'll see a list of your customer success executives display along with their email address. If you do decide you have any questions that pop up after this, you're more than welcome to ask them, and we'll make sure we get back to you with the answers. If you do not know who your customer success executive is, you're more than welcome to email the general customer success inbox below, and we'll make sure we get you to the right person. And we'll make sure we'll get your questions answered as well. So once again, thank you so much for taking the time to come to this presentation, and I hope you enjoy the rest of your day. Thank you.